Hi, my name is Casey Grace. I am a licensed social worker. My presentation today will be on cognitive behavioral therapy as a treatment modality for clients that present with anxiety and depressive symptoms. Jeff Dubin is my field instructor who was able to train me on cognitive behavioral therapy by providing me the tools that I needed, such as like workbooks and resources, um, different tools and techniques that he was able to train me on so I would be better able to assist our clients. The next slide is assessments and problem identification. So all of the assessments were completed at Equitas Health, and all of them were completed during individual therapy. So there were no group settings for this evaluation, just one-on-one with the clinician and client. The problems that we were looking to address was clients that had anxiety or depression. Those were the main clients that I was looking to engage with that was referred to me. The outcome that I was looking to have was basically to decrease the symptomology of the depression or anxiety with the intervention CBT. And the question that was posed for this evaluation that I hope to get an answer for was basically, did clients' depression or anxiety as measured on a weekly basis by the Beck Depression Inventory and the Beck Anxiety Inventory scale decrease after CBT began? So I'm hopeful by the end of this evaluation that I would be able to answer that. So this slide discusses planned interventions and rationale. My planned intervention was to basically use CBT as treatment for depression and anxiety. By using cognitive behavioral therapy with clients, we would be helping them to challenge some of the negative self-talk that they have in their minds. By challenging the negative self-talk that they have in their thoughts, it would also help change the way they're thinking about a certain situation or event. And by changing that thought, it would also help change the way you feel about that event. And then in turn, it would change the behavior and how you respond to that event. So that's basically how I like to think about cognitive behavioral therapy. It's basically your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior and how they're all interrelated. And we use several different techniques or homework assignments for clients, things that you can teach the client, such as like their thought records, where you can like walk them through that process, breathing exercises, teaching the client calm place, especially if they're having anxiety and they need to be able to calm themselves. And then visualization techniques are very helpful. But the basis of the negative self-talk and cognitive behavioral therapy, there's always an underlying negative core belief. And once you get to that negative core belief, that's basically the whole reason that the client is there in front of you, because they have this feeling that they are worthless, that they are useless, that they are hopeless, they are devalued, they're unappreciated. So by being able to get to that negative core belief and then start to challenge that is really what cognitive behavioral therapy is about. And there's a lot of literature in the World Health Organization, WHO. There's also research in Seamus There's lots of meta-analysis out there that I discovered, just basically supporting and backing up cognitive behavioral therapy and how it's effective with clients with depression and anxiety. Even like Psych Guide, they also had a lot of helpful information about how successful CBT is. It's one of the more used treatment modalities out there to treat for depression and anxiety. So here is just a continuation of the plan, intervention, and rationale. It basically is my logic model, which just shows the inputs, what we invest, time, research on cognitive behavioral therapy, time to shadow, training from the CBT clinicians, training on CBT through workshop books, collaborating with field instructors for evaluation, being able to discuss. So then goes to the outputs, and the outputs are basically being able to discuss positive self-talk and negative self-talk with clients and the effects it has on one person. Discuss cognitive distortion with clients, complete thought process worksheets together, and give them one to take to do as homework, because like my instructor says, like, they spend 1 hour a week maybe with us, and then they spend 200 and some odd hours away from us. So treatment doesn't just happen in session, it also happens when the client is definitely out of session. So that's important. And then another part of the outputs in the product is basically the scale that I was going to be using. The Beck Depression Inventory would be administered and evaluated with the client. The Beck Anxiety Inventory would also be administered. Patient questionnaire history would also be administered to clients and evaluated. And then there were outcomes that I was looking for. Some of the short-term outcomes were client would become more aware of negative self-talk and be able to refute it. Client would be able to identify cognitive distortions within themselves and actively work to change it. And then the medium goal for the outcome would be clients' positive thoughts will affect their emotions, mood, and behavior. They will be less depressed or less anxiety behaviors will be reported over time with the scale. And then the long-term goal was to just basically decrease that amount of anxiety and depression by at least 50%. And that the client would have new healthy coping tools to deal with their mood disorders. This next slide goes over measurement plan. So my plan was basically to measure their baseline and then on a weekly basis collect the data. So keep measuring it every week after session or sometime during the session. And the tools that I was going to use was the Beck Depression Inventory and the Beck Anxiety Inventory. These are both scales. They are self-report from the client, so that is about pretty accurate, I guess. The client could sometimes report a little bit higher or a little bit lower, but usually if it's coming from the client, we want to trust that they're giving the best information as possible. Data collection strategy would be basically myself, and I'd be collecting it in session at Equitas Health. That's the agency where I would be doing therapy. And then some of the problems or limitations that came up, or you could say barriers, were transportation. Clients have a lot of transportation issues. Some people are catching the bus with the weather being bad, below zero some days. Clients were not coming to appointments, so I would get them scheduled, and then it would be a below zero day and I'd see no clients. Just because I believe of transportation issues, people not wanting to get on the bus when the weather's really bad. Flu. I actually had the flu for about 5 days. I was not able to come into work or to my internship. And then PHP. So I actually met with the client, started collecting data, and then the client was entered into a partial hospitalization program. They needed a little bit higher level of care than what I was able to provide for them. So they did get the help that they needed, and eventually they were able to come back. But it was determined that that client would be meeting with my field instructor, and I could sit in and still see the client and watch the treatment process. But I think the client needed a little bit more services than what I was able to provide for them. Here's just a continuation of the measurement plan. It basically just shows the actual Beck anxiety inventory and the Beck depression inventory. It just shows the scale, how they are quantitative. There's a spot at the bottom where you can total it up, and it basically shows how severe the client's anxiety or depression may be. And this is a tool that I created, which is basically for the clients to be able to look at, because I would be reading the questions off of the Beck inventory, the Beck anxiety inventory, and the Beck depression inventory scale. I would be reading them out loud to the client and asking them to rate on a 0 from 1 to 3. To say if this is not at all, or if it mildly bothers me, or if it's moderate, it wasn't pleasant at times, or if it was severe, it bothered me a lot. So this is something that I would place in front of the client so they could just point to the number or tell me like, oh, it was moderate or it was mild. So that way I could know for sure that they were giving me what they believe, because sometimes when you ask people questions and they're not really looking at the scale, it's hard for them to remember like, oh, well, it was 0 or it was mild, was a 1, or a 2 was moderate, or 3 was severe. So I just thought it would be easier for the client. This next slide goes over evaluation design and rationale. My evaluation design was a single case study design, which is AB, which is basically the baseline and the intervention. I didn't do an ABA because I felt like that's ethically just not right to say, hey, you have this intervention, it's working for you, I've seen improvements, you've noticed improvements, but now I want you to remove that intervention. I want you to stop doing what's working for you. It's just so we can measure whether or not, if it's the intervention that's been working, or to see if your depression increases or your anxiety increases. I don't feel like that's good client care to ask the client to do something like that. So that's why I stuck to the the AB. Um, my design is basically individual therapy, working with the client one-on-one. It's a micro level practice. I didn't do anything um, macro or program kind of design. Um, but there are some concerns when it comes to a single case study design, such as interference with the internal validity, statistically regression, and multi-intervention interference. So one thing that I'd like to discuss is the multi-intervention interference, because there could be a number of reasons why the client starts to improve. It doesn't just have to be because your intervention was working. It could be because the client just recently started on antidepressant medications or anti-anxiety medications, or the client could be working with you and maybe they're also working with a marriage counselor, and maybe that's where some of their problems were stemming from. So maybe it's the marriage counselor or the couples therapy that's working, is the reason why they're seeing this improvement. So there's some concerns when it comes to an evaluation, because you don't know if there's outside things that are playing or coming into the evaluation. So those are just some of the concerns. Or statistical regression, basically just like the client started to get better because so much time had passed, so they just started to feel better. So that's always another possibility also as well. So this slide goes over data analysis. So this is basically the management of my data. I was able to collect and sort my data in a spreadsheet. I entered all of it into Excel, and then I was able to show like my baseline and my intervention, and I was able to show it all in a graph and how you can see the decrease in the symptomology. So you can see from the line and the slope of the line how the symptoms started to decrease over time, whether it was anxiety or depression. I was also able to calculate the effect size for the anxiety, which was a 0.8 or 0.80 for anxiety for the effect size, and then it was a 0.60 for depression for the effect size. So I was able to get all of that collected and sorted and placed into a graph, and you'll be able to look at the data that I actually collected on the next few slides. So this slide goes over the data analysis. It's just basically a continuation where you can see the the data that I entered into the Excel chart. So on here, if you notice, there are times in the baseline period where it starts off at a smaller amount and then it'll jump higher. This is because sometimes when you are starting to discuss some of the problems that the client or the concerns that the client's having, you're actually starting to pull these things to the forefront. A lot of the times clients are trying to avoid talking about these situations. Maybe they've tried to do things to distract themselves from discussing it or even bringing it to the light. Clients have a tendency to avoid painful or hurtful memories. If it's something that they can do or if it's something that's bothering them, they're not going to want to really deal with it. So sometimes when you start to discuss some of the issue and start to really dig and get at it, that's when their anxiety might increase. Maybe their heart rate might go up. Maybe their depression might increase, because now they're actually talking about the thing that's wrong, the thing that bothers them, or maybe like this past memory that's been haunting them for a while now, and they've just been trying to close this door and just keep it locked, or trying to avoid it for as long as they can. And now you're starting to talk to them about these issues. So now their depression starts to get worse, or their anxiety starts to increase. So sometimes you will see a bump in their numbers, but if you let the intervention keep working, sometimes, yes, they will start to improve. Just wanted to note that. So this slide goes over the data analysis. It's just basically a continuation where you can see the data that I entered into the Excel chart. So on here, if you notice, there are times in the baseline period where it starts off at a smaller amount and then it'll jump higher. This is because sometimes when you are starting to discuss some of the problems that the client or the concerns that the client's having, you're actually starting to pull these things to the forefront. A lot of the times clients are trying to avoid talking about these situations. Maybe they've tried to do things to distract themselves from discussing it, or even bringing it to the light. Clients have a tendency to avoid painful or hurtful memories. If it's something that they can do or if it's something that's bothering them, they're not going to want to really deal with it. So sometimes when you start to discuss some of the issue and start to really dig and get at it, that's when their anxiety might increase. Maybe their heart rate might go up. Maybe their depression might increase, because now they're actually talking about the thing that's wrong, the thing that bothers them, or maybe like this past memory that's been haunting them for a while now, and they've just been trying to close this door and just keep it locked, or trying to avoid it for as long as they can. And now you're starting to talk to them about these issues. So now their depression starts to get worse, or their anxiety starts to increase. So sometimes you will see a bump in their numbers, but if you let the intervention keep working, sometimes, yes, they will start to improve. This slide basically is the data from the previous slide, just in a graph form. So it's just my data analysis, just for like a visual for you. You can see the baseline is on the left side, and on the right side you can see the intervention. You can see where it spikes a little bit for their depression and for their anxiety, and then eventually it starts to go back down. Is the data from the previous slide. This slide basically is the data from the previous slide, just in a graph form. So it's just my data analysis, just for like a visual for you. You can see the baseline is on the left side, and on the right side you can see the intervention. You can see where it spikes a little bit for their depression and for their anxiety, and then eventually it starts to go back down. So this is the conclusion, and this is based off of the lessons that I've learned, and based off of me implementing my intervention. And technically, I did not get to do the full project as it was designed. So a lot of my data was based off of what I believe would have happened from previous research that I had done about how effective CBT was. Because of problems that had occurred, just like the weather being 0 below, clients not having great transportation. I also had the flu for about 5 days and was not able to attend. So a lot of things came up with like scheduling, attendance, transportation, and yeah. One of my clients was even placed in jail, and I found that out through the case manager that the client was imprisoned, and that's why they weren't coming. It's just been an interesting project trying to get it complete, and was not as successful as I thought it would be, but given the research, CBT has been shown to be effective for anxiety and depression, and just from my own sitting and experience with my field instructor, I've seen him use CBT, and I've seen how clients have improved over time with that. So I'm definitely in support of using CBT, especially if I go off on my own and start doing therapy with clients. I do want to be able to use the techniques that I was able to learn and share that with my clients. So this slide basically goes over the conclusion, and it asks the question, how did you use the evaluation information to guide practice or program decisions? So they were already using cognitive behavioral therapy at the agency, so this just further reinforced the validity or the reliability of the tools that they were using for the intervention. They are currently also using like the PHQ-9, but the Beck Depression Inventory and the Beck Anxiety Inventory is a tool that they could use moving forward in the future. So my field instructor, he's well aware of like the concerns and problems that I've had with gathering the data, but he does know that these are pretty good tools to get accurate measures. So my lesson that I learned from this project was basically don't wait to start your evaluation. Even if you start at the initial start point where they allow you to, I wish now that I would have started my project in the summer instead of going on break and doing volunteer hours. I mean, that it was nice to be able to get my volunteer hours out of the way for that break time, but I wish I would have started, instead of taking break, just went ahead and started meeting with clients and gathering that data as early as possible before the winter months hit and it started getting really cold. I think that would have probably affected my project had I done it in a warmer season, because I know a lot of people probably were not wanting to get out of bed and catch the bus in the cold. So, and I understand that. So that's probably one thing that I wish I would have done, just started to engage clients sooner.